For today's session, we're going to be presenting on ways to avoid Cribl heartbreak. My name is Julia Ferrante, and I'm a customer success engineer here at Cribl, and I have the pleasure of leading this Cribl skill session. So what does this mean? At Cribl, we strive to prevent unexpected issues, whether that's with products, education, tooltips, or guides, but with a rich product suite and with those products having lots of room for customization, there are always things that can catch even experienced Cribl administrators. Which brings me to our objective for today's skill session, to share some of the common gotchas and talk through some educational examples in hopes that it prevents you from running into the same scenario with your Cribl deployments. For today's session, we're going to talk about final routes and ordering, dropping and blocking, mapping rule sets, squashing changes, certificate expiry, license expiry, _raw, and we'll wrap it up with some closing notes. First, let's talk about final routes and reordering. The first thing we're going to talk about is route ordering. In Cribl Stream, routes are the primary mechanism for filtering, directing, and transforming incoming data from sources to specific destinations. They evaluate incoming events against filter expressions, direct match data to specific processing pipeline before routing them to a designated output destination. That being said, it is important the order of your routes and the settings for each route are correct and what you expect them to be. Some common gotchas we see are having routes with the final flag capture events too early. So if the final flag is turned on, the following routes will not be traversed. Having open filters like true that catch all data. Precision is a good thing here, so having a filter expression tailored to the expected data is a good practice. And then lastly, more people trying to edit the same file at once. We'll cover this a little bit more later, but working with your peers and ensuring any changes in route settings aren't contradicting behavior. For some tips to avoid these issues, you can avoid using that true filter expression. A filter like Palo log source shouldn't be used. Strings often resolve to truthy. You can leave yourself documentation and notes on what your route does, so things like names and descriptions. Be precise in selection. This ensures that data is going to the proper place. And use read-only internal Cribl fields like input ID. These are generally less likely to be altered and are more predictable. Up next, we have the difference between drop and block backpressure options. When it comes to handling backpressure, drop and block are not synonyms. With drop enabled, data that reaches a certain point is dropped. With block enabled, a stop sending data signal is sent back to the sender, and this means that block signals propagate back through the routing step. As a little exercise, let's talk through this example. We have a data source on the left that's sending data through a route to two destinations. The first destination has a drop backpressure setting, and the second destination has a block backpressure setting. If destination 2 encounters an issue and triggers backpressure, in this case, the block backpressure, what happens to the data flow in destination 1? The issue with destination 2 triggers the block backpressure, which then triggers that stop sending data signal back to the sender. That message then propagates back through the routing step to the sender, in which the data source responds and stops sending data. So just a good example to talk through here and show the difference between those two backpressure behaviors. Up next, we'll talk about mapping rule set changes. Mapping rule sets are used to assign worker nodes to specific worker groups in Stream, or edge nodes to fleets for Cribl Edge. Any settings in mapping rule sets are at a global level, so those configurations take priority over settings of individual nodes. So it's important to be mindful of this because when changes are made at a worker group or a fleet level, those changes actually take effect immediately and impact everything within that group. Alrighty, moving right along, we talked about this a few slides back, but preventing against interfering with one another's work. As a general rule of thumb, the system source of truth is what has been committed, not what has been saved. I know back in my college programming days, I learned that lesson the hard way. So let's talk through this example. So we have two operators. Operator A makes a change to file A and saves. Operator B makes a different change to file A and saves, and then commits those changes. Operator A then looks for their changes in file A, and they appear to be missing. This, of course, is because operator A made those changes, they saved the file, but because those changes were not committed and were then later overwritten by operator B, they do not see their original changes in the file. Some best practices to avoid this. Don't leave saved but not committed changes. Don't have multiple people trying to make the same changes or work on the same files. Have clear test environments separate from production to flush out any kinks. Keep an eye out for common files. And lastly, consider automation like Git or central change management. Cribl does integrate with GitOps, which is a great tool for safely building and continuously deploying in your Cribl environment. Up next, we have certificate or token expiry. Cribl Stream requires tokens and dependencies to be managed. This means that when certificates, for example, expire or maybe they're deleted, it can cause issues. Some common examples we see are TLS certificate expiration, auth token or API key expiry, and permission or role changes. So just a reminder to check on these things in your environments and make sure they are up to date. In a similar vein, we have license expiry. When using Cribl Stream, you should ensure you have a valid and current license. You can set up a notification for license expiry and work with your Cribl account team to get ahead of any sort of license renewals. And I highly recommend setting this notification up to make sure you're covered and that you don't run into the scenario above. Up next, we're going to talk through _raw and some internal field management. With _raw data, internal fields are transmitted in Cribl to Cribl links, but are dropped when going to a non-Cribl destination. This could look like sending from Cribl Edge to Cribl Stream, or from sending from Stream or Edge to Cribl Lake. _raw contains a copy of events before breaking, and this is not immediately obvious when previewing, so you should use the Show Internal Fields option to see what internal fields are within that _raw. Now let's see this in action. In these screenshots, we can spot the difference between JSON unroll and event breaker. Here at the top, you can see the JSON unroll, and over on the top right, the full event length. At the bottom, you can see the event breaker, and again, on the right, bottom right, see the full event length. Now let's see how we can go about finding the extra data. In this screenshot, you can see a sample data file is being tested in the event breaking pipeline. Toggling on Show Internal Fields and Show Dropped Events will display any internal fields or any dropped events, in this case, such as _raw, that might be adding to that full event length. And then lastly, some closing thoughts for today. We are all continuously learning, and being able to learn from previous heartbreaks is how we all get better. So with that, learning and testing is always key. As a deployment grows, formality with deployment procedures, process, etc., and the communication between team members becomes increasingly important. And then lastly, please do share best practices internally with your company peers, and then also with the wider Cribl community. This is a great opportunity to plug our Cribl Slack community. It is free to join. All of our Cribl employees are in the community, and many of our Cribl customers and users are out there as well. It's a great place to collaborate with other users, to ask questions, to bounce ideas off of each other, and to share new ways to innovate with Cribl. Our Cribl docs are available for each of our products as another great resource, and they walk through a lot of the setup and configuration in more detail. We also have our Cribl Packs dispensary, which includes Cribl certified starter configurations for some of the more popular sources or destinations. And then lastly, keep an eye out for more Cribl University content coming this year, as well as additional Cribl skill sessions like this one right here, which are available to you. And lastly, thank you for taking the time to listen to this session. I hope it was helpful and taught you something new about how to prevent your own Cribl heartbreak. Have a great day.